After I lost my job, my parents demanded I refinance their mortgage, but the bank teller recognized a signature that changed everything. I never thought losing my job would lead me to uncover something that would fracture my entire family. It happened on a rainy Tuesday morning when my manager called me into a glass-walled office and told me the company was downsizing. I remember nodding like I understood, even though my ears were ringing. By noon, I was walking out with a cardboard box and a severance letter that barely covered 2 months of rent. I didn't even tell my parents right away because I already knew how they would react. They never saw financial instability as bad luck, only as personal failure. That evening, my phone started buzzing nonstop. My mother's voice came through first, sharp and impatient. She told me I needed to come home immediately because we need to talk about something important. When I arrived, my father was already sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers. He didn't even ask how I was doing. He just slid the documents toward me and said I needed to refinance their mortgage in my name. I laughed at first because I thought it was some kind of misunderstanding, but neither of them smiled back. My mother explained that since I was unemployed, I had time to handle family responsibilities. My father added that my credit score was still useful, unlike theirs. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a request. It was an expectation. I told them I had just lost my job and couldn't qualify for anything. My mother waved that off like it was irrelevant. She said banks didn't care about employment as much as they cared about history. Something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. Still, I agreed to at least look into it because refusing them outright always came with consequences I didn't want to deal with. The next morning, I went to their bank branch downtown. The building smelled like polished stone and air conditioning that was too cold. I sat across from a loan officer named Darren who greeted me politely but professionally. I handed over the documents my parents had prepared. He started typing slowly, scanning each page with growing concentration. Then he paused for a second longer than normal. He asked me if I could wait while he verified something with his supervisor. That's when the tension in the room shifted. I sat there watching him walk into a back office with the paperwork. 10 minutes later, he returned with another woman beside him. She looked at the documents without speaking. Then she asked me a single question that made my chest go cold. "Where did you get this signature?" I blinked at her, confused. She pointed to my father's name on the mortgage authorization page. She said she recognized the handwriting immediately from a previous filing, and it wasn't from this mortgage. It was from a different property entirely, one that had been flagged for irregular documentation 2 years earlier. My mind tried to process what she was saying, but it didn't connect at first. I told her it was my parents' house. She shook her head slowly. She said according to their system, the mortgage on that property had already been refinanced once before. And the person who signed that refinance wasn't my father. It was me. I felt the air leave my lungs. I told her that was impossible. I had never signed anything like that. She turned the screen slightly toward me. My name was there in digital ink. My signature was there too, but it looked slightly off, like a version of my handwriting done by someone who had studied it carefully. I felt my hands start to shake as I realized this wasn't just about refinancing. Something had been done in my name without my knowledge. The supervisor asked me to step into a private room. Darren stayed behind, clearly uncomfortable. Inside the room, she explained that the mortgage had been refinanced using my identity nearly a year ago. The payments had been made consistently since then, all tied to an account I had never seen before. I told her I had never authorized any of it. She nodded like she already suspected that. Then she said something that made my stomach drop further. The property listed on the loan wasn't fully under my parents' names anymore. It was partially under mine. I asked her how that was even legally possible. She said it usually wasn't unless someone had access to personal identification documents. My thoughts immediately went to my parents, but I couldn't believe it fully yet. I left the bank in a haze, holding copies of documents I barely understood. The rain outside had gotten heavier. I sat in my car for almost an hour just staring at the papers. Every explanation I tried to form collapsed under its own weight. When I finally drove back to my parents' house, my father was waiting outside like he knew I would return with answers. He asked if everything went smoothly. His tone was too casual. I told him what the bank said about the signature. His expression didn't change immediately. That silence was worse than any denial. My mother came out and asked what was wrong. When I explained, her face tightened in a way I had never seen before. Not shock, not confusion, something closer to calculation. My father finally sighed and said we should come inside. That was the moment I realized the conversation was going somewhere I wouldn't like. Inside, he admitted that things had gotten complicated with their finances years ago. He said they had to restructure things creatively to keep the house. He didn't elaborate immediately. My mother interrupted and said it was temporary and harmless. But nothing about forged signatures and hidden loans felt harmless. I asked them directly if they had used my identity. My father didn't deny it. He said it was necessary to keep the family home stable. He said I should be grateful it worked. That was the first time I felt real anger rise in my chest. I told them I never agreed to any of it. My mother snapped that I was part of the family, so agreement was implied. The words hit harder than I expected. I asked how long this had been going on. My father finally admitted the refinance happened after I turned 25. He said they assumed I wouldn't notice because I was busy with my life. I wasn't just unemployed. I was now unknowingly tied to a mortgage I never signed for. I demanded to see every document. They reluctantly brought out a folder from a locked cabinet. Inside were scanned IDs, utility bills, and even copies of my old employment records. I felt sick as I flipped through page after page. My mother insisted it was all for family protection, but it looked more like identity reconstruction. Then I found something that didn't make sense at all. A deed transfer form with my signature dated 6 months before I even knew the house had financial trouble. I confronted them again. This time, my father avoided eye contact completely. My mother said I was overreacting and should think about the bigger picture, but I couldn't ignore the inconsistency anymore. I went back to the bank the next day without telling them. Darren looked surprised to see me again. I asked for every historical record tied to my name. After a long pause, he agreed under compliance review. What he showed me changed everything again. There were multiple loan modifications I had never seen, but the most disturbing part was the property ownership chain. The house had originally been under my grandparents, then transferred to my father, then partially to me. But the signature trail showed irregular timing and overlapping approvals. One of the signatures wasn't even from a living person at the time it was dated. My head started spinning as I tried to make sense of it. Darren quietly said there was something else I should know. He pulled out a flagged internal note. It said the original refinance investigation had been triggered years ago by a fraud alert, and the name attached to that alert was my father's, not for borrowing money, but for identity manipulation across multiple accounts. I felt like the ground shifted beneath me. Everything I thought I knew about my parents suddenly felt unstable. I asked if there was proof. He handed me a scanned copy of a prior audit report. It showed that my father had once been under investigation for using family members' identities to secure credit. My stomach dropped as the pattern became clear. This wasn't a single mistake. It was a system they had built. I left the bank feeling like I was carrying something heavier than documents. When I confronted my parents that night, the atmosphere was different. They were already waiting. My mother said she knew I had gone back to the bank. My father looked tired instead of defensive. He finally admitted there had been financial survival strategies used for years. He said it started small with shared credit adjustments, then escalated when debts piled up. He insisted no one was being harmed, but I was standing there as proof that wasn't true. I told them I wanted out of everything tied to my name. My mother said it wasn't that simple. She said disentangling would expose everything. My father didn't deny it this time. That was when I realized the real fear wasn't losing the house. It was exposure. I went upstairs that night and barely slept. Every memory of my childhood started replaying differently. Every document they ever asked me to sign without explanation now felt suspicious. The next morning, I made a decision I didn't fully understand yet. I contacted a financial fraud investigator listed in the bank report. I handed over everything I had. Within days, they confirmed what I feared. Multiple identities had been intertwined across loans for over a decade, and my name was just one layer of it. They also found something unexpected buried in older records. A second beneficiary claim tied to the property that none of us had discussed. It belonged to a distant relative who had supposedly signed away rights years ago. Except the signature didn't match any verified records. It matched my mother's handwriting style almost perfectly. When I saw that, everything clicked in a way that made me feel sick. This wasn't just my father's system. It was something both of them had participated in at different levels. The final confirmation came a week later. The bank officially froze all accounts tied to the property pending investigation. My parents called me repeatedly, but I didn't answer. I needed distance to think clearly for the first time in my life. The last message my father sent simply said we were family and should fix this together, but I couldn't unsee what I had learned. Months later, I learned they had lost the house during the audit process. The investigation uncovered years of undocumented refinancing and identity misuse. My name was cleared legally, but emotionally nothing felt clean anymore. The most unsettling part came when I received a final letter from the bank investigator. It said my signature had been used in places I still couldn't account for. Places even my parents denied knowing about. And at the bottom was a note that said the pattern suggested someone else had been training the forgeries independently. Not just copying me, studying me over time. Now I sometimes wonder when it actually started, and whether I ever really had control over my own financial identity at all.